Hello, can I confirm if I'm still on panel?
Hi, so sorry, but because of the disconnect policy, we've waited for over 5 minutes for you. So unfortunately you have been dropped.
All right, fine.
Okay, amazing. Hello, everyone. I'm Taryn. I'll be the chair judge for this round. Judging with me, in order, will be Estelle, Francis, Manda, Ryan, and Taki. Debating this round on proposition will be what is framing RAAHH on proposition, and on opposition, Serbia in ASEAN. The motion for this round reads, let me pull it up. This House believes that it is in the interest of China to gradually abandon the Belt and Road Initiative. I just want to remind everyone, please give POIs. That's a really, really important part of the game. Respect the first and seventh protected minute. And please stop speaking at 8:15. That's when we all stop writing and stop paying attention. That being said, could both teams please send their speaking order into the chat? And before they start speaking, indicate how they would prefer to have their POIs. I don't want to waste any further time. I want to welcome the first speaker from side proposition to start whenever they're ready. The floor is theirs. Here, here.
Hi, I'm Anson, the first speaker of Proposition. Am I audible and visible?
Yes, you're both audible and visible.
Okay, before I start, a few clarifications. One, I would like to show my gratitude towards my capstone comrades and also our dear coach Mai. And also, just a disclaimer: anything I say does not represent my personal views. Okay, I'll start my speech in three, two, one. Judge and panel, we tell you it is time for China to fall out of love with the BRI. Proud to propose. Few things in my speech. Firstly, I'll give you a few layers of setup and also some characterizations to what our model or world actually looks like. Then I'll talk about like 2 layers of substantives on how one, we help China's internal economy improve, and secondly, on how by extension we help its social optics rise, right? Okay, but quickly on the setup, we tell you today's debate is intuitively an actor motion, right? We tell you it's not about whether the BRI itself is good or not. It's not about what it has done for the world or how it has like helped society become more cohesive and whatsoever. We tell you it's about whether it still benefits China in the status quo or not, right? So a few characterizations, right? What is China's incentive on our proposition? What is opposition going to tell you? We tell you they're going to paint it as, oh, China wants to strengthen and expand its power and economy. They want to reject Western hegemony, all that very basic things, right? Judge, we tell you, while we agree that China cares about social optics, they do care about expansion, note that by getting a stable economy, we tell you it is the prerequisite to actually getting a high global status, to actually be recognized on the global stage, right? We tell you in however way, we tell you this is significant because this already preempts the vast majority of opposition's case if their entire case is about like spreading their ideals and influence, but more on that later. We tell you the true priority of China lies on about them care about their internal issues and like economy more. Why is this true? Three layers of reasoning. One, we tell you intuitively, when a country struggles internally, it's going to reflect badly in terms of like social optics anyways. The opposition needs to concede this. But two, we tell you China especially cares about internal perception and public view, as shown from how hard they're willing to like crack down on the protests and rebellion, on how they're willing to like exert their control over their current citizens in their country, right? This directly reflects on how they care about the public of their own citizens. But thirdly, and more importantly, right, we tell you that China has a unique history of being overthrown, meaning that their most recent emperor, Puyi, was like overthrown by the public, right? This is particularly crucial in today's debate because this proves why China is more likely going to prioritize its citizens and their well-being, whether they have food on the table or not, over relationships with Uganda and like their beef with the USA, right? We tell you what is the current world. A characterization of the status quo is that it is in a post-COVID world. We are currently very economically unstable. We are still trying to build all our infrastructure and like resources back up, right? Okay, but and moving on to characterization of like the BRI, right? What does it actually look like? Very briefly, right? We tell you it was like created to create structurize like a new trade route to like reroute global trade for China. This is to like from China, according to China, is to like enhance like regional connectivity, i.e. the goal to this is to like connect China to like Central and South Asia and Europe and Africa, just basically everywhere except like the west part of the world. We tell you where their goal was to like engage and trade with like the majority of the world, including like Afghanistan and Saudi Arabia and many more other countries, right? Okay, but what is the characterization of the status quo? What is wrong with it right now? Why would China want to pull out of the BRI right now, right? We tell you infrastructure is a very high risk and high reward game, meaning that it needs like long-time implementation, whereas in the long run, there's a large chance for failure, right? What do we see right now in the BRI? We see it losing economic steam. We see it having a lot of scandals, including like debt traps regarding China, which is bad for rep. We see it struggling in this current status quo, which is that that we are recovering from pandemic. We see a lot of countries lending money from China, countries like Pakistan and Laos, which ultimately till this point still has not returned this money. What this looks like is China losing money and no one holding these small countries like Pakistan accountable, because China is the strong one and Pakistan is the defenseless one. We tell you China in the status quo right now has no way of forcing these countries to actually return all those billions and billions of dollars they have unlimitedly lent to them, right? Okay, so onto our counter model quickly, 2 layers. One, we tell you on our side, we can still have trade despite giving up the BRI, but only with countries succeeding well. And we 2, focus on domestic policies. We tell you this is exclusive on proposition because we tell you resources are finite. It is about priorities. Obviously, if we're super strong, we can do both. But given how economically unstable China is, with its wealth disparity issues peaking, these resources need to be allocated wisely. Only on our side of proposition, whether we stop, and in which we stop funding the BRI, in which we stop lending money to countries, that we can accurately utilize these funds for more credible and beneficial trades, that we can strengthen their economy to increase their capacity, exports and imports, right? But quickly, 3 layers, right? Okay, whatever that is, RAAHH. Okay, firstly, we tell you in the motion for generally abandoned, right? What this looks like is that China will actually stop mentioning it and withdraw investments and funds and whatsoever. This is what we mean by gradually abandoned. But secondly, we tell you today's motion is only talking about abandoning BRI right now. The motion does not assume that China gives it out entirely. We tell you opposition needs to make this distinction. We tell you it is only in the concept of right now, and AKA what this looks like is that they can pick it up after some time in the future with a more stable economy that can only be attained on our side of proposition by abandoning it right now to recognize their internal issues. But thirdly, we tell you on our last piece of framing, there are many other ways to build social rep. BRI is not the only way. We see China building good relations with other means, for example, BRICS and their recent expansion, right? It is unclear to us why BRI is exclusive. But lastly, quickly, onto our burden of proposition, which is our winning pathway, we tell you it's relatively simple. As long as we prove that BRI brings no benefits, then we already win today's debate. What this means is that we don't even need to prove that it brings more harm than good, right? Just because there is no net benefit means that China is willingly putting money into something that does not help it gain profit. We tell you that is already wasting money in itself when there are other things that China could be doing. We tell you this in itself is already detrimental and unstrategic for China, and opposition needs to defend this with their all. Okay, quickly, move on to substantives, right? One, we tell you the main reason to why China would give it up right now is because the Belt and Road Initiative is currently failing and it no longer benefits China. On the contrary, because of how much money they're losing, they're actually sacrificing and trading off their economy for relationships, which you find that to be counterintuitive, right? So our premise to this is, we tell you a country intuitively prioritizes its economy over its good rep. We tell you the economy is the prerequisite for actually having good social optics. You can rule the world. You can't rule the world with all your citizens in poverty, only like 1% of the people being filthy rich, right? 2 layers to why it is currently failing. One, note that the BRI originally only worked in the context of the economy being good in the past when it had only started, right? This is proven like in the case in which after COVID, in which the economy absolutely crashed, everything went haywire. They had to engage in a lot of bailouts, meaning they had to spend like 10,000s of money to actually bail out these projects, and thus a lot of debt traps occurred. We tell you this happened because China had to take accountability of this. Since the BRI was their initiative, opposition needs to concede and engage with this argument. 2 layers to why this is bad, right? One would tell you internally and internationally, this caused a lot of financial trouble, meaning that they had to bail out countries part of the BRI, meaning that they had to become a lender to the as a last resort to these countries. This looks like Sri Lanka, Pakistan, not repaying their loans and having had to seek help from the IMF. This looks like fixing them by offering them even more loans and putting them in even more trouble, since banks are unlikely to willing to authorize such large loans, right? But 2, domestically, this was also really bad because like they lost a lot of like dollars regarding regarding these. There are lots of billions of dollars regarding these lost loans, which and because like China cares about the social optics, it really doesn't. They're unlikely to actually get it back. Note, this is super bad because one, not only are they now like not only is like this a sunk cost, like they have already given up billions of dollars to other countries who are unlikely to give it back, but also note that these large amounts of money could originally be used for China to actually solve its wealth disparity, to actually give take care of the citizens they have like responsibility over. And because of these reasons, proud to propose.
Thank you very much for that very fine speech. And I want to welcome the first speaker from side opposition to open the case on opposition bench. Here.
Okay, my speech will start. Verbal POIs. My speech will start in 3, 2, 1. The BRI has accrued and will continue accruing benefits for China. We reject this motion. 3 parts set up. We agree that this debate is an actor motion. So what are the interests of China? We agree yet again with proposition that China is stability over all else, but we say political relations is crucial for this because China has currently has an export focus and economy. And note, this was going to be our POI, but they did not take it, so they could have engaged, but they did not. This means they rely on trade and being on good terms with countries. We accept that China has internal weaknesses it has to deal with, for example, like the domestic issues on the consumption-driven economy, but we think that these will take a long time to fix. People's opinions must be changed in China. They're doing this, but money can't just solve everything. Having the amount of money from BRI is not going to solve this issue. The low confidence in the Chinese market, this is something based on people's opinions. They'd rather save and invest than consume. This is not something you can just solve by throwing a certain amount of money in. Therefore, we also believe that these are secondary focus to the main focus of keeping the consumption-driven economy up and running, because we think Prop is giving a false trade-off when they're saying that economics and political relations aren't closely intertwined. You need political relations to keep up China's export economy. At the point at which you forget this, the whole economy collapses, right? The low internal demand in China, these types of things, these are currently an issue in China, right? The reality is that currently China, the reason why the economy is suffering is because demand for China's exports are falling, which is exactly why we currently need the BRI to solve this. We think that therefore this debate should focus firstly on ensuring that other countries have good relations with China and continue buying China's exports. Second, on the status quo for BRI. How does the BRI actually look like? It looks like infrastructure development, specifically focused on trade facilitation, because as explained in our model, that's what China needs the most to keep their economy afloat. So this looks like building roads, it looks like building bridges, railways, ports, airports, a lot of sea routes that have been opened up trade so much, right? So how much money has the BRI actually spent? It hasn't even reached $1 trillion yet. So it's not actually that much if you look in the context of international politics. I mean, look at the US invasion of Iraq that turned out disastrous. Just that single intervention cost more than the whole of the BRI initiative, and look at how much impact it already has had. The sheer fact that we're having this debate at all means that the BRI is something that's disgusting. It has had an impact with this limited amount of money in terms of international politics. You cannot frame this debate as a debate on purely short-term economic gain. This is an international politics project first and economics policy second. So some rebuttals now. They talked about this idea that China is struggling in the status quo, that they still haven't returned this money. Again, this is a false premise. The economists of China aren't dumb. They have never expected an immediate return because that hasn't ever been their goal. In our model, we already said the goal isn't economic first, it's political first. Then on the counterfactual about how they would abandon means stop mentioning it, we think that the West has extremely criticized the BRI. So if your model says that public opinion is so crucial, then this is a clear harm on your own metric. As China, you're admitting that that you're wrong by saying, okay, let's stop mentioning it. You're not going to be able to keep it quiet. You've already invested a significant amount. This will be constantly mentioned by the US. We think this can turn the public opinion that you say is so important. So 2 points. First on strategic interest and second on economic growth. We think that there are certain crucial strategic interests that you cannot ignore. Oil, gas, resources for making batteries. If China doesn't secure these resources, they could potentially be sanctioned out of them, especially because of US sanctions. They don't have good relations with the West. An example of how they did this with an Ethiopia in 2004. China and the BRI suspected there was oil there, but instead of invading, which was the past US strategy for gaining national interest and strategic interest, they gave Ethiopia a deal that was mutually beneficial for them to secure those resources. And note that proposition cannot come up here to say that there will be backlash, because this is a must for countries to do to there won't be backlash because they mutually agree to this, right? They must have benefited in this deal to have agreed to it. We say that it is important, it is crucial for China to have these strategic interests ensured for national security. And even when the country mismanages the infrastructure loan or it fails, this has actually turned out good for China. We think that this is a clearly mistaken explanation for a problem. I mean, look at Sri Lanka. They mismanaged loan and it defaulted. This was their fault. It's clear to countries they mismanaged. So after this, the BRI has still been able to get loans, to give loans, and countries are still willing to take those. But that's besides the point. The point is that they were able to gain a strategic port from Sri Lanka from the clause which Sri Lanka signed. So it's beneficial for, yet again, keeping up trade. China benefits from all of this. They gain from continuing to give loans even to whatever countries they mentioned, like Pakistan. It's also incredible for image. I mean, you've got China leading a union of, I think, around 50 nations with the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, right? No country is able to get that much buy-in just by their own deal. Not like the US has tried to copy China with their own versions. They have not worked out because China does not interfere. They have a non-interference policy, unlike many of those. It's not only good for how people of the country see China, but it's also an invaluable negotiation moment. This is what allows China to stop from being isolated, especially when you're being isolated by the US. Things like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank are also crucial for being a counterbalance to Western institutions, because so this not only does this make China in particular more powerful, it makes the global South more powerful, which pushes up China with it. Note that Trump is going to say that China does this in a tyrannical way, but that's just straight up false. Everyone in the summit discusses and talks. It's clear to most people in the global South that this is the case. They're not going to listen to Western influence. There's already a big trust of Western hypocrisy. Being tyrannical isn't in China's interest, because why would they want to be tyrannical if there's backlash? They don't need to be tyrannical to gain the benefits of discussion and being part of world discussion. All of these strategic interests must be secured in order to keep the stability of China's economy that propositions find so important. Second, on economic growth, we think that these initiatives benefit everybody, but they benefit China a lot. Many times China gets Chinese workers to work abroad in these projects. This creates huge job opportunities. For example, in Pakistan, thousands of Chinese workers and engineers went over there. This benefits both countries, so Pakistan agreed. Yes, it might skew towards China. Maybe it's not skewed towards China, but remember, that's good for everybody. But I'll take a POI before I continue.
After sending a lot of workers to develop a dam in Ecuador, the dam actually cracked and left the project in complete failure. What is your response to this?
That's one failure in a sea of successes. So in general, connectivity of countries, we can make trade more efficient. Note that all of these projects, as I talked about in general, right, they have led to more trade routes, which is the most important thing because China is an export-focused economy. So China has so many products to export. The problem right now isn't supply, it's demand. So it's incredibly valuable for the economy to increase demand in all these countries, so that countries that have in the past stayed out of economics, like countries in Africa or countries in the global South in general that are less developed, those countries are now entering the economy and crucially starting to negotiate with China and starting to buy Chinese iPhones, right? For example, the domination of Huawei in Africa, right? So workers are more likely to go to China, we think, when they see these projects. We think in general, this leads to huge job creations. And also all of these above strategic benefits that we talked about in the first point are making sure that the economy is stable. So why does all of this matter? Why do all of these economic benefits and strategic things that I talked about here matter? This is what has worked for China and has uplifted millions from poverty. This has, compared to whatever counterfactual that you guys have, it has proven to work, and it has worked to uplift millions from poverty through this, being open, through stopping to be isolationist, to being an export economy. China's economic growth is still really high. China's economy needs this. Proud to oppose.
Thank you so much for that very, very fine speech. And I want to welcome the second speaker from Side Proposition to continue the debate on Proposition Bench. Take care.
Hi, I'm making sure I'm audible and visible.
Yes, you're audible and visible.
Okay, thank you. I'm Haley. I go by pronouns she, her, and I prefer verbal POIs. Note that anything in this speech does not reflect my actual stance. Thank you. Okay. start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Note that the thing opposition tells you is that the BRI has, quote, proven to work. Proven to work doesn't mean anything after COVID racked up everything. It messed up the economy and it has left every single country's economy in shambles. Proud to propose. Before I move on to 2 extensions on why. 1, it causes bad international reputation, and 2, why the priorities should be shifted onto domestic policy instead. A few rebuttals that we were going to ask as POIs, but there was a lack of engagement. 1, PM already tells you framings to why China is likely to care about the economy more than politically, and we tell you, I'm going to reiterate again. 1, when a country struggles internally, it's going to reflect badly in terms of social optics anyways, and 2, we tell you already that China especially cares about optics, especially because of their history. It is much more important to them, and therefore we tell you that they need to solve their economy in order to do this, but more on that later. 2, they tell us opposition tells us that this is a false premise that is harmful to their economy, i.e., they say the death traps don't exist. 2 responses to this. 1, I don't think this is true. When you're pumping money out with death traps, using it to loan out to countries instead of using it internally to solve things like wealth disparity and poverty. 2, they tell us that, because projects fail amidst a sea of successes, that means that, it's not going to be harmful to the economy. 1, can you please give me 1 example? PM already tells you like multiple on instances that they have failed. And 2, even we're charitable and we say that yes, it is a sea of successes, it means that you're using the money you get from one project to fill the gaps of one huge disaster that is causing you trillions of money and huge economic loss. Okay, opposition also comes out and they talk about social optics and why it's more important, right? 1, we tell you that countries are only there, they only buy in to China's policies because they're there for the economic interest. Whatever they do about like ideals or like whatever political ideals they're trying to spread does not matter because they're only in there for the benefits they gain themselves, and i.e. this means the economic benefits. And 2, they need to prove exclusively why BRI is the only and the best way to increase your social optics or to improve social optics. PM already tells you there are other alternatives, just as BRICS. They need to explain this more sufficiently to us. They also tell us about like, China being seen as a tyrant. We tell you that it doesn't matter whether they're tyrannical or not, as long as you get the largest amount of influence and your economy is the strongest, which means you naturally have that influence. Before I move on to extensions, then I'll take your point.
We gave an example in our speech, Ethiopia. The US has been boxed out from the resources to make batteries, while China has been able to secure those strategic interests in Africa. Please respond.
Okay, 1, we're not excluding the fact that you cannot invest in infrastructure. PM tells you that we've cherry-picked the most effective, the projects that are guaranteed success and they're to guarantee the maximum profit, and we invest in those specific ones instead of trying to do it everywhere all at once. And 2, it also, again, I already tell you why. Because of this big failure, it means that you're likely to use the money you gain for the profit to invest in this failure and to cover it up instead, meaning you get no profit at all. Okay, moving on to 2 extensions. 1, it's bad for your international reputation. Even if panel, you don't buy on our framing on why the economy is China's first priority, we tell you we attain opposition's burden better, social optics, right? The infrastructure, if the infrastructure isn't even working, it's likely to be very bad for social optics if your projects don't even succeed. This looks like getting workers from China to plan and build. They succeed the implementation, and then they simply leave. They do not teach the local workers how to maintain it, how to keep on regulating it, how to improve the infrastructure, which means that after the Chinese workers leave, it's going to be a big mess and a big failure. This is likely to happen, and it means that the infrastructure is likely to fail anyways because it's the nature of this project. But even if the infrastructure is working, 2, there's a mass criticism for China about human rights violations. Everybody know that's why China is facing so much criticism, especially because you have, for example, things like debt trap diplomacy, where you knowingly give so much money that it is to a point where these countries, especially since they're LDCs, are unable to return it back to you, and then you ask them for other things in return. For example, the ports in Sri Lanka. This leads to 2 harms. 1, it's not profitable when the country is struggling so much because there's so little for China to gain from this kind of transaction. And 2, it perpetuates the accusations of things such as neo-colonialism and imperialism by these debt traps, and we think that is even more harmful towards their reputation. Note that it doesn't matter whatever China thinks about their own like policies or whatever project they implement, as long as the West thinks that this is unethical, it means it's still bad for China. And especially when you're losing out on host countries complying with China, which is crucial to the whole BRI plan working in the first place, you are subject to huge international scrutiny. Note that world leaders aren't stupid. Presidents or even the average Joe can tell when you are pushing money into them for the sake of doing so, and knowingly not being able to return the kind of money, and obviously they cannot refuse this money when their citizens are starving. This is bad then because of two reasons and on two levels in general. Firstly, for the countries you're cooperating with, when you have such bad social optics, when people are stigmatized against you and when your infrastructure is failing, it means there's less incentive for them to continue cooperating with you in the future if your projects are failing. This is talking about like new countries who may have the potential as, for example, swing countries who want or do not want to join the project. But two, more importantly, the West, which China so hates about, will hyper scrutinize on whatever flaws your project has because that's how they are. We concede that there will always be Western criticism no matter what they do, but the only way to minimize this is to make sure that all of your plans are a success. It is to make sure that they all work. What does this mean then? On the comparative, on our side, you cherry pick the projects that are ensured to succeed, and you use this one super successful spectacle then to prove your worth to the West. Because of that, I think it is much more effective and strategic for China to use the best policies they have instead of like going everywhere. Okay, second extension then on why China is supposed to prioritize domestic policy. Two layers to this. One, what China wants fundamentally as a strong economy. PM explains this to you, right? Yes, we concede that the purpose of BOI is to help the economy, is to build back the economy, but two reasons why that is not true. One, the purpose of like helping the economy doesn't mean what actually happened when you have flimsy projects and the actual implementation fails. And two, note that we're talking about the current world, i.e. a post-COVID world where the economy is just in shambles right now. China already has so many problems, as opposition correctly points out, when their banks are also failing under debt, when there's wealth disparity, when there's an aging demographic, when there's pollution, and when there's a lack of education. China is struggling internally. Therefore, it is simply unstrategic to one, pump out money with debt traps instead of using it internally to improve your internal infrastructure, and two, it means that other countries are less incentivized to work with you. On the comparative, on our side, you still get trades, but you only do it with countries that are succeeding well, and you're guaranteed to get profit. What this means is that you can get this profit to invest it internally. You can use it to stabilize the internal economy before incentivizing them to reach out. Second layer then, which is the prerequisite of becoming a global superpower, is being a strong country yourself in your own right, because nobody is going to listen to you when your own country is in shambles right now. No, this is not just the West. It looks like rival neighbors, i.e. ASEAN and Japan. And one, you have to effectively manage your internal affairs. For example, uphold human rights to be perceived as more likely as reliable and trustworthy by these strategic and crucial nations that you need to gain the interest of. And two, even if not, that's not true. We tell you there's soft power. For example, because your economy is so strong, you naturally attract overseas investors without having to actively reach out. Because of that, all those reasons Project proposed.
Thank you so much. Sorry. Thank you so much for the very fine speech. And I want to welcome the second speaker from side opposition to continue the case on opposition bench. Here.
Am I audible and visible?
Yes, you're both audible and visible.
Thank you. I will pronouns she, her, and POIs verbally only. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, it is a known fact that China is an export economy. It is in their interest to make trade, to have good international relations, and to have a lot of money coming into the economy. I'm going to start off my speech by rebutting the points of the proposition. Proposition is unclear about their case. At the beginning of the debate, they say that the most important thing here is what is in the interest of China, but then they say that they're winning pathways to prove that the BRI is unnecessary. I think that this is counterintuitive. China is an export economy. Their interest is to maintain power. The BRI allows this to happen. I'll elaborate on this further in my speech. The Proposition says that debt traps occurred and that China had to bail out countries and had to become a lender as a last resort. Not every country owes China money, and also China doesn't bail people out every time. We talked about the Sri Lanka case, about how their lease gave China one of their strategic ports for 99 years when they failed to return their loan. Now, our proposition's main case here is that the country struggles internally, and that is bad. Yeah, and what else is worse? If the entire economy is isolated and China loses its exports, they will struggle even more. The reason why the domestic problems are shown is because exports have fallen. So China needs to have the domestic market to buy more products, but they don't have that domestic market, which is why you need something like the BRI. They need that kind of incentive coming from further nations. They need that international community buying in to their exports. Opposition says that after Chinese workers leave, it's just going to be a big mess. First of all, they don't just leave after the project is finished. And second, China has incentives to continue the BRI. Proposition talks about human rights violations. Which examples? Even if China did death traps, that has nothing to do with human rights. You're just arguing in extremes without giving clear mechanization. A proposition talks about how China is pushing money into countries. We preempted this already. Countries take the money because they realize that it could benefit them. Yes, there may be a risk of failure, but it benefits them enough that they took the risk. You say politicians aren't dumb, but here you yet again assume that they are. Literally, the 50 nations in the Asian Investment Bank, they stay there because they think that China has done good by them. I'll take that POI.
Don't you recognize that countries with failing economies have to take the money because their citizens are starving and there's nothing else they can do?
Okay, I think that with the BRI, a lot of the international agreements that they do are counter beneficial. They benefit both countries. So it's infrastructure development, it's a development of the economy, it's cultural trade. And in that sense, both economies will benefit from it. I'll elaborate on this later in my speech. Opposition says that we cherry pick the good countries to give loans to. This is twofold. First of all, if you hate loans from the BRI so much, then which you have spent so much time talking about, then why are you still following the BRI format? Please think of your own world instead of ignoring the motion that says abandon. Second of all, how are you able to pick the good countries to give loans to? This is an assertion. Prop spends the entire debate talking about why the BRI is bad, and I've already proved to you why the BRI is in the interest of China, and Prop even concedes this by saying that China needs to have good economic ties. That being said, I don't see any factual from Prop. They don't tell us why their side is better. So I'd like to push something onto Prop. Where is your factual? We have a really soft case here from Prop. They're still going to make investments, then they have to have the same harms just to a lower extent. But even here we say that having the current amount is better. Also, if you're saying China is incompetent in investments, why will your strategic promises likely succeed? Their case is based on symmetrical facts that they repackage their unique harms. Don't be fooled, okay? They say that there are alternatives to BRI. Okay, where? It seems like Proposition doesn't like the fact that people are economically suffering China. We also don't like that, but we think that the BRI brings in necessary relations and money to support these people. They say that projects are flimsy. They say the economy is in shambles because of COVID, but I think that Prop thinks we disagree with that, which we don't. They say that China should trade with countries that are stable, but we already told you that China has negative international perceptions. Countries have alternatives. They won't trade with China. Trade is not all that is in China's interest. Soft power is also in China's interest. No, thank you. Now, on to arguments. I think that as per our characterization of China, it is in their interest to have global power, to have control over the economy, and to have good international relations. The main thing that puts China as a severe deficit is international relations and the lack of soft power, especially compared to so many other nations. Look at Korea and Japan. Their culture is so assimilated and spread everywhere, and that gives them soft power. It gives them inherent relationships with a lot of Western nations and other Asian nations. This looks like Korea with the spread of K-pop, for example. Now, that cultural significance is so inherent to international relations. We think that in China is inherently lacking this. The Belt and Road Initiative actively bridges their connection with other countries and allows them to have better international relations. This happens for three main reasons. First of all, economic ties. The Belt and Road Initiative actively engages in investing in infrastructure, giving loans, increasing trade, and what this does is that it creates economic trust. Countries trust countries that actually help them develop their economy. Opposition cannot say that the Belt and Road Initiative is solely seen as an attempt at neo-colonialism, because most of the time these initiatives are mutually beneficial and tie China's economies together with other economies, making them interconnected. China doesn't benefit when other countries do bad and vice versa. This is absolutely imperative to create international relations and foster trust with connecting countries. Second reason is that international relations improve is that because China extends their diplomatic diplomatic influence. Joint and collaborative initiatives of the Belt and Road Initiative are exactly what build trust and increase diplomatic influence, can enable China to have a greater say in global governance and decision-making. Note that this is in the interest of China. It's in their interest to have that position in diplomatic decision-making. It's in their interest to have that kind of soft power. Third reason, cultural exchange. A huge part of the BRI is for people to have people-to-people exchange. Insofar as people are exchanging goods, ideas, customs with one another, China achieves some level of cultural assimilation in the debate. What this does is three main things. First of all, it fosters good cultural diplomacy between countries and their people, especially because it prevents the narrative that the BRI is hostile in other countries. Second, it improves perceptions of China in these other countries. For example, African countries that used to have good ties with the US because of their diplomatic efforts are now closer with China because of the opportunities of the Belt and Road Initiative. And then China is also seen as a country with the initiative of improving the stability of other countries, improving the infrastructure of other countries, and this is enabled by cultural acceptance. Now, third, this enhances China's soft power and reputation, and it allows them to gain influence in foreign countries. And this influence further establishes their power and strengthens their international relations. Look, I think that the biggest winning pathway here is by proving why these international relations are so important. Prop says himself that China's economy is so important. This is for both domestic and international perception. And I think that to the extent that Prop themselves says this, but then they argue that it is in China's interest to abandon the BRI, they contradict their own case. China is an export economy. They need good international relations in order to have a good economy. When they get rid of this, it harms their perception, which is what Prop claims that they protect. It harms their perception for two reasons. First of all, they lose out on major trade ties, which they need in order to sustain their manufacturing market. Prop cannot claim that trade can survive without this initiative and that China will maintain its position as the top export economy. International countries have many trade alternatives. It is mutually beneficial partnerships that attract countries to the BRI. They lose out on international relations. The key relationships that the BRI fosters are imperative for China's international relations. It creates trust, it creates connection, and China can't have a gain otherwise due to their negative perception, which is largely created by Western countries and Western perceptions. And that is exactly why it's so important to have international relations, because it's the only way that they are enabled to have a good economy. It's the only way that they are enabled to support their own economy. It's the only way that they are enabled to actually have an economy, maintain their export economy, and actually come out of this big shamble that proposition talks about, the shamble that COVID has created. And this is exactly why it is so important. It is in the best interest of China being an export economy. It is in the best interest of China to have that soft power. And I don't see any engagement here from proposition on this case. In fact, I don't see much from proposition. They tell us why our case is bad, but they never tell us they are factual. They never tell us why their side is better. They never tell us why they have a better life for Chinese people. They never tell us why they have a better interest, why they hold a better interest of China. Proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very fine speech. And I want to welcome the third speaker from side proposition to continue the case in proposition bench here.
Hi, I'm Chloe, the third speaker of proposition. Am I clearly visible and audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, that's great. My POI preference would be verbal, and before I start my speech, I would like to clarify that anything said in this speech is not representative of my own personal political views. It is only in the spirit of the debate. Okay, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Panel, it is quite evident that the One Belt, One Road initiative is leading to roadblock after roadblock, represented quite ironically by Montenegro borrowing $1 billion through this initiative to build an unfinished road to nowhere. Proud to propose. 2 things in my speech today. Firstly, I want to tackle some of the strategic mistakes side opposition has made in today's debate. Then I will present my clashes, firstly on economic growth, secondly on international relations and diplomacy. But firstly, allow me to address strategic mistakes and loopholes in their case. We told you from first that resources are finite, they are limited. You need to put them into things that are of highest priority, the things that matter right now, which are domestic policies, right? Which my second speaker told you. How did they respond to this? They told you that these things are automatically of second priority because 1, they are of long-term importance and can't be fixed overnight. Precisely because of this, they need to be fixed immediately. You need to start right away for the long-term impacts to show up earlier, right? And secondly, they said that you can't fix it with money. Literally, this is not true. You can just pay people to have children by subsidies. You can invest in education. You can invest in healthcare. They have not tackled the root of our point on this, which is that which is that it is very important for China to focus on its internal issues before doing anything. They then tried to dispute the entire nature of the Belt and Road Initiative, right? They say that it is not tyrannical. I don't think that they actually know much about the actual BRI. This is about debt trapping. They're not gifts to the countries. They are loans that result in countries being indebted to China without the means of being able to pay back the debt. This is the nature of the BRI, exploiting the weaknesses of the host country. Nobody has paid China back. This was China trying to be strategic, trying to get countries to become indebted to them, and therefore being able to suck all of the resources out of them. And outside opposition only tries to mitigate this fact by saying that not everyone is falling into debt, which means that they agree with us that at least some, if not most, are. If we want to win them on reputation, China perpetuates the Western perception of neocolonialism and further harms the West's stigma, which I will elaborate on later. Also, note that the success of the BRI is contingent on the full acceptance and dedication of all countries it is trying to collaborate with, right? But this is not true, as I will tell later. Then suddenly, opposition 2 also tries to burden push us, saying that we need to provide a factual. We already told you why. Our burden is very simple. It is just to prove that there is no benefit. Because when China is not growing its money, it's stagnant. And that is already enough incentive to drop it. They try to say that China needs economic ties and somehow we need to prove how we do this better. Fine, I will still be charitable and engage on this, although my previous 2 speakers have engaged with this already. But before I move on to my clashes, are there any POIs? 3, 2.
Please explain why our side is incapable of working on these long-term goals for the domestic economy. In our
Okay.
setup, we already said that the money we spend is not actually that much.
Okay, literally, it's billions of dollars, $200 billion to be precise, that we have lost, not just invested, right? But even China is not like, it doesn't have unlimited money. Money does not fall from the sky. Even a big powerhouse like China, they have limited resources. If something is a waste of money, we cut it, we put it into something more meaningful. We don't see how this stands. But moving on into my first clash on economic growth. The sad truth is that these countries are liabilities to China. It's not that we view them as a lesser country, but from a political viewpoint, instead of the initial expected impact of boosting trade, it has only left China with monetary losses. China can't do anything to get these countries to pay back if the countries literally just prove that they're basically bankrupt. There are third-party intermediaries like the IMF that stop China from intervening, right? Also, helping to fill global infrastructure isn't something only China has its eyes on. Global companies also want to do this, and therefore there's a lot of stiff competition that China is facing. So therefore China doing this is very unstrategic. We already told you in first speaker why this money isn't actually getting used for useful purposes. Like Sri Lanka used their loans to build a really tall building, which was basically a vanity project that did nothing. Ecuador built a dam that had cracks and couldn't be maintained. We see that all these projects are failing. These are all examples of China is basically seen as a joke by other countries now and funding failing projects. Now, what did they did not directly respond to this, but instead gave their arguments for their own side, which I will also take down now. Firstly, they told you that they would secure resources with this initiative instead of getting sanctioned out by the West, right? This harm is literally not exclusive to our side because China already doesn't get most of its resources from the West. It gets them from small countries. Sure, in the short term, through this initiative, you can get some resources from them, but sooner or later, the West can also exert influence over these small countries. You cannot escape this conflict of interest with the West through the BRI. And also, resources are going to run out one day, and China can't just keep sucking it out of small countries because that's likely not enough to maintain China's population, which is in the billions, right? Rather, on our side, we get these resources still by trading with successful countries, improving our relations with the West, with thriving economies and maintaining good relationships. Relationships between nations are even worse on your side of the house, which also destroys your point on a second independent level because you keep trying to emphasize that it's an export economy, right? But I will prove that later in my other clash. Now, moving on to this random point about job creation, about like Huawei's prominence in Africa and that creating jobs and people wanting to move to China. This point is self-contradicting because the projects that are happening in China are done by China's workers, China's architects, China's scientists. This does not create job vacancies for locals. But say, even if they do, there are many ways this still does not make any difference. Sure, we take you at your best on this point and say that jobs are created. When these projects end, these people become out of work anyways because the project is over, leaving people unemployed regardless. even if people continue to stay employed to maintain the project, the host country still doesn't have enough money to pay them, and they don't have the skill set to actually do the job. And it is safe to assume that the host country does not have money to pay these workers because they literally can't pay back any of the debts that they owe to China, right? They emphasize so much that China is an export economy. I want to ask, what exports are happening? Resources are ultimately going to run out. The way the BRI works is sucking everything out of countries that are already failing economies. Their idea of how the BRI works is naive and ill-informed. What we do on our side is actually do projects that are low risk, high reward. We have all the things that they have without the losses. We can do this because we have good international relations. This actually goes beyond our burden, which was just to prove that there are no benefits. I will now move on to my next clash, which is on diplomacy and international relations. I agree with O2. It's very important, but we think that there are many other alternatives to this. For example, other alliances, like something like BRICS, right, which attains the same optics and the same relations, and they cherry pick the quality countries, right? Not the arguably less financially developed countries who are probably going to end up indebted to China and bankrupt. China's BRI is a leeching program with a cute little bow on top to be presented to these host countries as a gift. It's literally China being a parasite. We told you that the US and the UN and the general West are criticizing China for the way they're carrying out this project and perpetuating neocolonialism. What was their response? They told you that China is not incentivized to be cruel. No, they definitely are, because isn't it amazing to get resources by just dumping some money onto unreturnable money onto them and getting oil and gas in return? Except people are refusing to buy into this anymore. We told you how even India and Afghanistan, they have recognized that this plan is just completely a scam. It is a hoax. It is trying to get them to be indebted to China so that China can kind of exploit them for all their resources. If nobody is opting into this, we don't see how China is benefiting from this. Proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you so much for a very fine speech. And I want to welcome the third speaker from side proposition to close the substantive part of this debate. Here. Opposition, sorry. Yeah.
Hi, am I clearly everyone visible?
Yes, you are both.
Okay, perfect. She, her pronouns, verbal POIs. I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Proposition cannot come into this debate pushing all these harms that still exist on their side and never actually give us any proper counterfactual on how they want to make any of this better on their side, right? Their burden is not just to prove that BRI brings no benefit. They need to prove that there's something better, because with nothing, China is screwed. If you don't want BRI, what do you want? They cannot come out in second and say that, oh, there are alternatives. You cannot come out in third and say that you will pay people to have kids. You cannot get away with that. Read the news, please. How exactly is paying people to have kids going for China? Pumping money is not enough, right? As under your setup, we are struggling. You are not at all charitable or engaging. You have to build a good economy, stop rising prices, and create more jobs to incentivize Chinese people to turn for the better. They keep repeating that their burden is that this has zero benefits, but their factual is just cherry picking. This is contradictory. Now let me call them out for the extremely weird case, right? They talk about domestic issues in the first minute of their first speech, or about the spy-fold. First, we can mitigate this because you are gradually abandoning, not actually instantly abandoning. Read the motion. You still need to deal with it on your side. And you will probably have issues with the economy, even worse, and politics when you make such a big change, right? 2, this debate is not about domestic issues. They always exist everywhere. And so far as we have proven that this benefits China, it doesn't matter. And 3, the price of BRI is not a ridiculous amount of money. That's not like, it's not too expensive as a political project as compared to like many others. If we prove that can bring so many benefits to China, we take the trade-off. That it might take longer to solve these issues that you talk about, right? 4, the reason the government has multiple branches is to solve these issues, right? Those who are dealing with the Belt and Road Initiative are not dealing with these like domestic issues you're talking about. Having good IR and solving issues not contradictory. They can happen at the same time. The benefits outweigh the harms. I'll expand on that in clashes. And finally, on your thing about how China cares more about their internal view, I just don't think this is true, right? I don't know why they bring this example of some emperor from ages and centuries ago. China realistically has lots of control over their citizens. They don't need to protect their image from them because unless you want to get shot, you probably won't retaliate on your own metric. Like, China is apparently tyrannical. They don't have to be. Normally, I move on to my clashes earlier at this point of the speech, but they never actually ran any proper arguments that make sense. So I have to rebut them alone and point out all these strategic mistakes they make before I move on to my clashes. I'll take a few if there are any. No POIs, engagement
POI?
noted. Okay.
POI? Why
yeah,
does
okay.
stopping BRI directly mean it's stopping at all external trades?
Yeah, I'll tell you why in my second class, okay? I'll flag you there. Okay, moving on to the first class on geopolitical influence, right? The only thing they say is that this brings no benefit. I don't think they give you any proper argument, right? I don't think they actually listen to any of our speeches. They say that China needs to rule the world, but how can they do so on your side? We don't need to prove why BRI is the only option to improve optics, because you on the side that doesn't give us any option at all, right? They say that the infrastructure is failing and bad for optics. There's this thing called improvement. It hasn't always failed. There has been so many successes that you conveniently ignore. Secondly, insofar as you build it, you improve your optics. You can teach whoever you want how to maintain it. Even if it's failing, we can improve it. At least we have something to do. And also, they talk about these like human right violations. Like, be for real. Look at the entire world. Human right violations are existing everywhere, whether they're discrete or not. The U.S. is funding Israel. They are in zero position to talk. This is literally not part of the debate. You have no optics at all because you have nothing. I'll expand on that later. There are 50 countries involved because 50 countries believe that you have potential. Because China can economically grow, they trust this. These are educated individuals making these decisions. On our side, we gave you so many layers of analysis and examples on how this is beneficial to China, right? Instead of, we literally told you the interest of China as a country. They need political stability. No matter how much you try to push, that is gradual. It is a massive change, your economy and your relations with other countries. You need a counterfactual as to how you can maintain any of this. They conceded in their own characterization. I rebutted everything about domestic issues, so I won't waste more time on it. Insofar as we are able to prove to you that China's economy and political influence will be better on our side, we prove how we benefit the main stakeholder and we win. The fundamental idea of the Belt and Road Initiative is that it creates interdependence between countries. It creates trust and cultural exchange, which means there are good relationships between China and other countries. Take one look at status quo. The only countries China is probably friends with are the ones involved with BRI. The reason is because of globalization, and because of it, right, you lose all of this on your side because one, you have no counterfactual, but two, we give you so many layers of analysis that you conveniently ignore. When you bow down and agree with other countries that haven't participated yet, that the BRI has failed and you completely drop it, you will be seen as a joke. You lose everything we have built on our side. Your image improves so much when you actually improve it. You are managing such a big project. China needs to be more China needs more strategic allies, which only our side can get. We gain soft power because we have trust. They never actually rebutted any of this. Moving on to the second class on economic impact, they just say this one word, debt, right? I'm actually speechless about what to say here because you still need to pay back, you still need to deal with the debt on your side, right? How do you do this? You have zero counterfactual. Secondly, they never actually explain to you why this debt is so bad, right? Look at the US, look at any international power. They're under so much debt, but they are so successful. You cannot rule the world with your people. They tell you that you cannot rule the world with your people in poverty. They just destroy their own case by saying this because one, the economy is suffering because we do not have enough good relations, because there isn't trade. Two, they never actually tell you how this doesn't happen on their side, how any of this improves on their side. Three, they're worse off because they have no chance of saving the economy. You cannot just roll over and wait for something to magically happen as your economy only trades with itself. The economy is the one thing that can save the economy, right? When your side wants to just abandon something that helps the economy and you don't have an alternative, you screw over these people even more. Four, they cannot cherry pick these examples of when it has failed because there has been so much success. They gave you so many examples that you've ignored, right? They say that BRI is a liability, they're vanity projects. But even if we do accept that China does vanity projects, that isn't just a waste, right? China must have had an example to do so. Like, for example, soft power, right? There's so much goodwill that they can get. But also, these vanity projects are not likely to be the most expensive projects China invested, right? And thirdly, why is infrastructure good and actually helps countries, right? First of all, it increases efficiency of work for a country. Two, the reason why developing countries stay behind wealthy countries is because they don't have the efficiency from infrastructure. Three, again, Pakistan, this is something that actually works. That's why countries like the US are scrambling to form their own version of the AIIB. They tell you that you are exploiting weaknesses of these weak countries, sucking resources out of them. I'll rebut this briefly, right? One, BRI loans are so much more charitable than the actual death traps that the US gives, right? Two, no, every loan of aid that one country gives another already has some sort of power imbalance. This is symmetrical. The only difference is that BRI loans aren't as bad, right? But three, these loans are purely economic and they don't influence the sovereignty of a country, right? Now, moving on to our side on this clash, China needs an export country economy because China needs a proper economy because in this way today's world, unless you're a hippie in some tribe. You cannot exist without the BRI. You give us no alternative as how you take us out of the bad situation. Even in our worst case, at least we have something. Alex gave you all the reasons we can economically succeed on our side. Like we said, we have more trust and international relations on our side. That means there's more trade on our side. And here's where I respond to your POI. There's more trade, which saves the economy, because right now you cannot trade with your economy screwed up, right? At least our side has a chance. Because PM spends 8 minutes on setup and still doesn't give you any counterfactual, doesn't give you any positive materials, and the second speaker calls that out for not taking POIs, when we're at the side that has actually taken POI, when P1 doesn't, they don't actually debate this actor motion when they talk about how much smaller countries suffer. I do not see how they can win. As they say before each speech, it doesn't align with their own stance. I think they concede that whatever they're saying is just completely false and ridiculous. Because we take both classes, I'm so proud to oppose.
Thank you so much for a very, very fine speech. And I want to welcome the reply speaker from side opposition whenever you're ready.
Am I audible and visible?
Yes, you're both.
Okay. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. China's economy has risen not because of their powerful domestic markets, but because they decided to open up the country, decided to stop being isolated, and work on their relationships with other countries. The proposition case has identified the right things, like the fact that stability is China's main goal, and that China does have domestic issues, but that isn't enough for them to win the debate. They needed to prove why their points were more important than ours. They needed to prove why their side was better than ours, and we didn't receive that analysis. We told you 3 things during this debate. We told you that we protect China's strategic interests, we have more economic benefits, we maintain China's international relations. We told you that China needs relations, they need economic stability, and we gave you mechanisms about how this works and why this works. They told you that our side makes China's economy worse. They told you that perceptions are worse on our side, and they told you that the BRI is too expensive. I think that we can say that the BRI is expensive, but its price is worth the economic benefits that it brings. They keep saying that there are alternatives, but its price is worth the economic benefits that they keep saying that there are alternatives. They say that China cares about their economy, but they need to understand that this is an actor motion. China suffers without its alliances. They have negative perception already. Their BRI is what connects China with other economies. It is what gives them soft power. Prop can't just say that China can join BRICS. China doesn't have that reputation. China doesn't have that international reputation that allows them to join BRICS, for other countries to trust them to be a good economic partner. It is the BRI that actively enforces their relationships with other countries, that actively ties their economy with other economies, that actively creates that international relation, and that is what allows them to have a good economy. That is what allows them to have any kind of economic benefit from the BRI. This is what makes it impossible for POP to claim that they also maintain China's economy. They claim that China's economy and domestic infrastructure is bad. How do they fix it? POP can't claim the benefit of having a better domestic economy when they actively do nothing. Say for the sake of debate, just for the sake of debate, I concede that the BRI is too expensive. We still think that this is a better alternative to the other side of the debate. It is still in China's interest to maintain the BRI because it gives them soft power. It gives them good perception. And even in the worst case scenario, where China doesn't get back their loans, they don't get back their money, they have created an economic tie. They have established soft power in another economy. These are 2 main points, both big, large interests of China. And I think that without these interests, because proposition doesn't achieve them, they lose out on the debate. They lose out on the fact that this is an actor motion. We are doing what is in the best interest of China, and the BRI is in the best interest of China. And it is definitely a better alternative to what a proposition gives you, which is nothing. Now, there are 2 main points that we need to talk about. We prioritize the interests of China. Prop forgets that this is an actor motion, and they don't engage with our burdens. Prop says why our side is bad, but gives no factual. How do we know their side is better? We don't. I think that Prop made strategic mistakes from the very beginning of the debate. They burden pushed the entire debate. They gave us no counterfactual, and their entire case falls apart with one question. What do you do that's different from us? But let's take your non-existent counterfactual of cherry-picking BRI loans. How do you think that picking countries will work if Prop themselves say that most initiatives fail? This is a contradiction. Note that you are the only side that is gambling and hoping to win. Chinese citizens need people to buy their products. That's what we enable when when we increase exports. Chinese workers need jobs in Africa. This helps feed their families back at home. They aren't just soulless projects. Proposition spends the entire debate saying again and again that our side doesn't work. I have already told you many times they gave us no factual. They cannot claim the benefits of having the harms. They cannot claim the benefits of not having the harms they push on us because they have those harms. They still have a bad economy on their side. They never tell us how they're going to slowly take away the Belt and Road Initiative. They never tell us how that's going to happen and how they're going to maintain China's economy. Don't ignore China's external issues in favor of their internal ones. China needs soft power, and they need to continue fostering friendships to create trade that at the end of the day are for solving their internal problems. Proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very fine speech. And I want to welcome the reply from side proposition to close off this debate whenever you're ready. Here.
Hi, am I visible and audible?
Yes, you are both.
Okay, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Afghanistan's president admitted that China's plan is quote unquote just loans and that they wouldn't take anything that wasn't directly labeled as a grant. Sure, in the interest of China, it is fine for them to continue with the BRI and do these ethically questionable things. But if we want to win on social optics, we already win. Very proud to propose. Before that, I'd like to clearly state that on opposition, they talked about how China is an export country and how we should be prioritizing trade. Okay, we agree, but 3 layers of response, right? One, it is unclear to us why on their side China even has the funds to even have export and continue to do these so-called trade with others, right? Opposition never tells us why countries even have the incentive on opposition to continue trade with China when people are actually dying internally and wealth disparity is continuously thriving, right? On opposition, they do not have the funds to actually deal with this exclusively only works on proposition because citizens on the way to living prosperously needs the funds that China is currently allocating to continue to mindlessly fund the BRI, right? We tell you these two characterizations cannot exist simultaneously. But 2, we tell you the BRI is not about building relationships. It's about debt trapping countries so that they remain so horribly indebted to China that they have to keep giving back until everything runs out. We would like to question opposition. What trade is happening? What trade is happening within this, right? What are the economic benefits? We tell you opposition has lost on the lack of grounding and a lack of response. We have been pushing this for 3 speeches and this still lies unanswered, right? But thirdly, right, we tell you stopping the BRI and pulling out of it temporarily, but just right now, does not mean stopping external trade, right? We just find this very confusing because they never actually responded to our POI when we asked this to O3. We tell you that on our side, trade can still simultaneously happen, as you can see from China recently expanding BRICS, right, and continue to having strong relationships with Russia and other countries. We tell you it is unlikely that just because they stop the operation of BRI, they're just gonna isolate themselves and focus on self-sustainability, right? Opposition never proves this incentive. Okay, 2 things in my speech. 1, onto some strategic mistakes by opposition, and 2, breaking the opening deadlock, essentially giving you some world comparisons. Okay, moving on to strategic mistakes. 1, we would like to re-clarify the factual we stood from the very, very beginning, right? We tell you opposition cannot twist our words and tell us that we don't have a model and how we're quote unquote we're doing nothing. We have already told you that 1, China has other means of maintaining social rep. For example, BRICS and how it recently expanded. What this means is that even China acknowledges that BRICS in itself is a good thing, it's a beneficial thing that deserves to be invested in, unlike the BRI, right? But 2, we tell you on our side, we still have trade. The difference here is that we are trading only with countries that are succeeding well and stop debt trapping poor countries, because it has been shown in the status quo that it is counterproductive, that China is losing money by scamming these countries, right? But thirdly, we tell you that we prioritize the internal problems first to gain that same amount of soft power, right? Oh, by the way, in response to opposition's response to BRICS, which ironically came out in a reply, which is that China, quote unquote, does not have the power to do it. We tell you China cannot join BRICS because China made BRICS, right? China is the owner of it, so it doesn't make sense. But secondly, opposition also tells us that China prioritizes social optics more, and that helps you turn the other way around. But they also fail to tell us how China is going to cope with carrying such a heavy burden, which is the BRI, when they're insufficient in themselves. Their only strategic response to today's debate is how, oh, our burden is too low. We don't think that losing billions of dollars to random countries, which could have been self-investigated to boost oneself, is a marginal loss. But again, to re-clarify, clarify, we tell you this does not have to be set in a world which is nothing versus BRI. We tell you export still happens. They still haven't engaged with this when I brought this up in framing in my first speech, right? But quickly, breaking the opening deadlock, even if we are charitable and we engage on our worst case scenario, we tell you we agree and we are willing to engage in a trade-off to losing on certain exports. We are willing to sacrifice international relations for a short while if it's for the sake of solving internal issues. Sure, we don't expand, but at least we stabilize and improve our existing frameworks, our population, our domestic policies. We tell you this is a low-risk, high-reward game that we are more comfortable with. That is something that is exclusive on proposition proud to propose.
Thank you so much for a very fine speech. I want to thank every speaker that just spoke. It was a fantastic debate, and we're very happy to have been able to listen to it. And I want to invite all judges to please come to breakout room 3, I think. That's, I think, where no one else is in, and we'll deliberate there, and then at closing ceremony, you'll get the results. So breakout room 3 for the judges. Breakout room 3 for the...
Thanks for the debate, guys.
Thank you
Whoever
for the
wins-
debate.
Oh.
Please skip the finals.